A Boeing 767 cruises high above the Atlantic Ocean on its way to Egypt. 217 people are on board. Just half an hour after takeoff, disaster strikes. The pilot and co-pilot struggle desperately for control of their aircraft. The lives of all on board will depend on these two pilots and what they do about this dive towards the ocean. The John F. Kennedy International Airport outside New York City is one of the busiest airports in the world. In 1999, nearly 32 million passengers fly in and out. More than 340,000 flights take off and land. Just after 1 a.m. on October 31st, 1999, the 217 people on board Egyptair Flight 990 are waiting for takeoff. The flight's command captain is Captain Ahmed El-Habashi. He's been with Egyptair for 36 years. Yes. The command first officer is 36-year-old Adel Anwar. He switched duty with another co-pilot so he could return home in time for his wedding. The airline's chief pilot for the Boeing 767, Captain Hatem Rushdie, joins them in the cockpit. The co-pilot assists the takeoff. For safety, both pilots push the throttles. On a flight of 10 hours, it's standard practice at Egyptair to provide a relief crew to share the flying duties. The command crew takes off and lands. The relief crew flies the middle portion. Tonight, Captain Raouf Nur el-Din and First Officer Gamil el-Batouti are the relief crew. They will take over after the first 3 or 4 hours and fly the plane until shortly before Cairo. A large number of passengers are senior citizens from the United States, looking forward to touring the wonders of ancient Egypt. There are 14 of Egyptair's experienced crew operating the flight. There are also 33 Egyptian military officers and pilots on board, returning after training with the American Armed Forces. Gamil el-Batouti used to be an Egyptian Air Force flight instructor. He's now one of the oldest first officers at Egyptair. He's so much older than the other co-pilots that out of respect they call him Captain. First Officer Anwar concedes and is ready to hand over to el-Batouti. Normally, this is the most relaxed, easy part of a long flight for pilots and passengers alike. The highly automated aircraft systems will take care of the flying for several hours. Before the captain returns, disaster will strike Egyptair Flight 990. The fate of everyone on board will be in the hands of the co-pilot, the man who shouldn't be here in the first place. Egyptair's Flight 990 appears to be cruising smoothly over the Atlantic. The relief first officer Gamil el-Batouti is alone in the cockpit while the captain has gone to the washroom. But then the plane dips, plunging down. The nose pitches down, creating zero-G, weightlessness, throughout the aircraft. Captain El-Habashi fights the disorientation of zero gravity, desperately trying to return to the cockpit. Warning signals indicate the dive is exceeding the maximum speed allowed for the plane, taking them to 99% of the speed of sound. This far past the plane's design limits, the stresses on the airframe are pulling it apart. Captain El-Habashi pulls back hard on his control column. Then he tries to use the engines to power their way out of the dive by pushing forward on the throttles, but he gets nothing. Desperate, the captain deploys the speed brakes, panels standing up from the wings in an effort to slow the dive. Captain El-Habashi struggles to level the plane and pulls back hard on the control column. The engines stop and the power goes off, plunging the aircraft into darkness. The cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder stop. No one knows what happened in the plane during the next 2 minutes. At 1:52 a.m., Flight 990 disappears from radar screens, crashing into the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, some 100 kilometers off the American coast. Coast Guard search and rescue get a call at 2:15 a.m. At the end of October, the waters of the North Atlantic are so cold that normal life expectancy is about 5 to 6 hours. At the crash site, all that's left is pieces. Within hours, authorities know there's little hope for survivors. Shocked and grieving, relatives arrive at Newport, Rhode Island. They will seek answers and share comfort. There were 100 Americans, 89 Egyptians, 21 Canadians, and 7 victims of other nationalities on board. They're all asking, what caused this tragedy? Teams of investigators will pursue that question for years to come. The job of finding the black boxes would be difficult. The water is about 70 meters deep, and the tremendous force of the crash has smashed the locator beacons off the boxes. 9 days after the crash, the US Navy's unmanned submarine Deep Drone recovers the first of the 2 black boxes, the flight data recorder, which stores information about what the aircraft and its systems were doing. 4 days later, the second black box, the cockpit voice recorder, lands on the deck and is carefully transported to the NTSB laboratories. The cockpit voice recorder captures all sounds in the cockpit for the last 30 minutes of the flight. The black boxes are protected to withstand impacts of 3,400 times the force of gravity. The recovery of the cockpit voice recorder provided a gripping and bewildering picture of the last minutes of a disaster. Here, investigators hope, is the key to unlock the mystery of Flight 990. Translating the Arabic spoken in the cockpit is a top priority at NTSB headquarters. At the NTSB, American investigators found no fault in the aircraft from studying the flight data recorder. But Egypt's members of the investigation team insisted that not all the evidence was in. Much of the wreckage was still in storage on Rhode Island. They hope the cause of the crash can be found here. Egypt's representatives search for any possible mechanical cause for the crash. While they search, other theories are pursued. A study into the causes of airline crashes published in January 2001 points to pilot error as the cause of 1/3 of these accidents. It also finds a strong connection between bad weather and pilot error. But the crash of Egyptair 990 occurred in clear weather with veteran pilots. What happened in the cockpit would divide the investigation and fuel an international controversy. The investigation develops in 2 directions: fault in the airplane and pilot action. Rumors swirl about what or who may have caused this terrible crash. One of the key questions: why was the relief first officer in the cockpit hours earlier than expected? He was supposed to replace Adel Anwar much later in the flight. When the actions in the cockpit are put together with the voices recorded, a timeline emerges that indicates a series of initially bewildering decisions. The timeline reveals that after Captain El-Habashi leaves the cockpit, there's a series of sounds whose meaning can only be guessed at. And then the relief first officer disconnects the autopilot. Released from the autopilot's control, the plane starts to descend, rolling to the left. Egypt's experts described El-Battuti's decision to shut off the autopilot as a possible reaction to an unusual movement of the aircraft, prompting him to take manual control. However, the leader of the NTSB investigation disagrees. After switching off the autopilot, El-Battuti pushes his control column forward, lowering the elevator panels. So the flight data recorder indicates to the NTSB. Then he pulls the throttles back, reducing engine power. This causes the plane to dive. Egypt's investigators say El-Battuti was not trying to crash the plane, and there may have been an elevator failure which he could not overcome. Strangely, there is no discussion of a problem on the cockpit tape. When the captain made his way back to the cockpit, he asked the first officer what was going on and never received a response. Fighting the dive, pulling his column back all the way, the captain cannot gain complete control of the elevator, so he tries the throttles to power out of the dive. He was unaware that seconds earlier the first officer had shut off the fuel to the engines. Egypt's experts say that El-Battuti may have been acting out of caution. The flight data show that a low oil pressure warning appeared. That can mean the engines have flamed out. The captain may have then ordered the fuel to the engines shut off as part of the procedure for restarting the engines. The NTSB consider this possible scenario as well. Foremost among the Egyptian investigators' scenarios was a tragic elevator failure. In Washington, at the National Transportation Safety Board, analysis of the flight data recorder indicates that Captain El-Habashi was pulling back on his column to make the plane climb, while First Officer El-Battuti appears to be pushing forward on his column, making the plane go down. Elevators work simply. Pull back on the column and the elevators go up, lifting the plane. Push forward and the elevator panels move down to make the plane descend. They work together, But in this case, they're going in opposite directions. Egypt's experts argued that this crash could have been caused by a failure in the elevator assembly, producing an elevator hardover, a jam in the elevator controls which lock them in the down position, plunging the aircraft into an uncontrollable dive. They stated that First Officer El Batouti was working to regain control of the elevators and added that he and Captain El Habashi were working together. Supporting evidence is found when analyzing fragments of the wreckage in the hangar at Rhode Island. Here, investigators made a remarkable discovery: 3 unusually sheared rivets. These tiny parts play an important role in the Boeing 767 elevator assembly. Egypt's consulting experts determined that the scratches in the metal surfaces of these rivets showed that they were sheared off in 2 different directions. One direction could be attributed to the crash. The second could indicate that the break occurred before the crash, and so may have indicated a jam in the elevators. Egypt's experts drew this to the attention of the Federal Aviation Administration, America's civil aviation regulator. Alarmed by the potential risks, the FAA ordered all bell crank rivets to be inspected on every Boeing 767 in operation around the world. The inspections uncovered 136 sheared rivets, and 34 aircraft were grounded until the fault was fixed. The FAA said the problem could result in loss of controllability of the airplane. Egypt's investigators had uncovered a credible-sounding scenario: that the sheared rivets in the elevator assembly of the Boeing 767 indicated a jam that could have caused an elevator hardover that the pilots could not overcome. NTSB investigator Greg Phillips disagreed.
Those are by design for the Boeing 767. The controls can be split. They're designed that way in case one of the surfaces, the control surfaces, fails, so that whoever is still in control of the airplane or can control the airplane with a failed elevator.
Finally, on March the 21st, 2002, after a nearly $10 million investigation over 2 years and 5 months, the NTSB publishes its report and determines that
the probable cause of the Egyptair Flight 990 accident is the airplane's departure from normal cruise flight and subsequent impact with the Atlantic Ocean as a result of the relief first officer's flight control inputs.
The Egyptian Civil Aviation Authority responded angrily, and their response read in part,
"It is obvious that the NTSB has not done the type of professional accident investigation expected by the Egyptian government."
There continue to be differing perspectives on the crash of Egyptair Flight 990, and unanswered questions remain for broken and damaged families. For many of them, answers to how and why this plane crashed will forever be a painful mystery.